The banners of the Aurelian Empire burned above the capital spire, their living silk dimming as the war dragged into its final cruel season. Queen Zyra stood upon the balcony of obsidian crystal, her many-faceted eyes fixed on the city below. For 10 cycles she had ruled, and for 10 cycles the stars had bent to her will, yet now the enemy fleets pressed closer with every passing hour. The coalition that once trembled at her name had united, driven by fear and desperation, and their cannons thundered at the gates of her world. The council chambers behind her echoed with argument and despair. Generals spoke of dwindling plasma reserves, of shattered shields, of legions reduced to memories and ash. Priests whispered that the Star Mothers had turned away, offended by pride or ancient sin. Zyra listened to none of it, for she could feel the truth in the vibrations of the city itself, the pulse of panic moving through streets and towers like a sickness. This war had begun as conquest, a necessary expansion to secure the outer lanes. Worlds had fallen quickly, their defenders unprepared for the precision and ferocity of Aurelian war doctrine. But victory had bred resistance, and resistance had become unity among the conquered. Now the Empire faced a foe larger and more determined than any before. As the suns dipped low, casting the capital in red and gold, Zyra made a decision born of both pride and desperation. She would address the people directly, something no Aurelian queen had done in 1,000 cycles. If the Empire was to fall, it would not fall in silence. The Grand Forum filled beyond capacity, layered platforms rising like a mountain of bodies. Soldiers in scorched armor stood beside artisans and scholars, younglings perched on shoulders, elders leaning on staffs grown from living metal. And among them were outsiders, traders, envoys, prisoners of war allowed to witness the last speech of a dying empire. When Queen Zyra emerged, silence swept the forum like a sudden void. Her carapace gleamed, etched with the history of her line, her crown a halo of floating shards humming with restrained power. She raised a single claw, and the sound of the city faded entirely. "People of Aurelia," she began, her voice amplified not by machines, but by resonance fields woven into the air. "We stand at the edge of an ending. Our enemies believe us broken, they believe our spirits spent. But we are the children of stars and storms, we were not forged to surrender." Her words stirred the crowd, yet beneath the surface ran fear. They knew the reports, they felt the tremors of bombardment. Hope alone could not stop the armadas massing beyond the atmosphere. As Zyra spoke of sacrifice and unity, her gaze drifted across the assembled masses. She saw devotion, grief, anger, and resignation. Then, at the edge of one platform, she noticed something strange. A figure stood apart from the others, smaller, softer, wrapped in plain garments unsuited to this world. The being was human, one of the prisoners captured in a skirmish months earlier. Humans were new to the galactic stage, fragile, divided, and underestimated by nearly every power. This one did not kneel or bow, did not avert their eyes as protocol demanded. Instead, the human watched her with an intensity that cut through the noise of despair. Queen Zyra frowned slightly, an unfamiliar sensation stirring within her. As the speech neared its end, she prepared to call for one last stand, a glorious final battle that would be remembered even in defeat. But before she could finish, a sound broke the sacred silence. A single voice rose from the crowd, clear and steady. "Wait," the human said, stepping forward into the light. "I know how you can win." Gasps rippled outward, guards raised their weapons, and outrage flared across countless faces. Queen Zyra lifted her claw again, halting the immediate execution that protocol demanded. Against every instinct, she felt compelled to listen. And so, in the shadow of a dying empire, the fate of worlds paused, balanced on the words of a lone human who dared to stand. The forum erupted into chaos as the human's declaration echoed through the tiers. Soldiers surged forward, energy blades humming, while officials shouted for silence and order. Queen Zyra remained still, her crown shards spinning faster as her mind raced. "Who are you?" she asked, her tone sharp enough to slice stone. "And why should my empire spare your life for such insolence?" The human stopped a few paces from the front line of guards, hands raised slowly to show no threat. "My name is Elias Morgan," the human replied, voice steady despite the weapons trained on him. "I was a systems engineer back on Earth, before your fleets ever found us." A murmur passed through the alien crowd at the name of the distant blue world. Earth had fallen quickly, its defenses shattered, its people scattered across labor camps and occupied colonies. Few expected anything useful from its survivors. "You claim knowledge of victory," Zyra said, her eyes narrowing. "Speak quickly, human, for you balance on the edge of oblivion." Elias drew a breath, glancing briefly at the massive holo displays showing enemy fleet movements. "Your enemies think like you," he said. "They fight for territory, for dominance, for pride. But they fear one thing more than your armies: unpredictability." Some laughed, harsh and bitter. "Unpredictability does not stop antimatter lances," a general snapped. "It does if you know where to aim it," Elias replied. "You see a war of fleets and planets, but humans have always fought wars of systems, logistics, psychology. Your coalition is strong because it is united by fear of you. Break that fear, and their unity collapses." Zyra felt a spark of interest despite herself. "Explain," she commanded. Elias nodded. "Your empire controls the central trade lanes. Even now, you still manage the infrastructure their fleets rely on: refueling hubs, jump beacons, data relays. They use your systems because they were never meant to fight you for this long. If you alter those systems subtly, not to destroy, but to deceive, you can turn their coordination into chaos." Hollow projections shifted as Elias gestured, showing simulations of misaligned jump points and delayed reinforcements. Small errors magnified across hundreds of fleets, leading to collisions, missed rendezvous, friendly fire, and panic. "This is treachery," a priest hissed. "It is survival," Elias countered. "Humans learned long ago that you do not need to be stronger than your enemy, you only need to make them fight themselves." Queen Zyra studied the human, her senses probing for deception. She found fear, yes, but also conviction and something else, a fierce hope that burned brighter than any weapon. "Why help us?" she asked quietly. "Your world suffered under our rule, your people were enslaved." Elias met her gaze without flinching. "Because if the coalition wins, they will not stop with you. They will purge every empire that ever challenged them, including the remnants of humanity. I am not choosing sides out of loyalty, I am choosing the future where someone survives." The forum fell silent once more. Queen Zyra felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon her, tradition urging caution, pride urging defiance. Yet extinction loomed larger than either. "Bring him to the War Council," she said at last. "If he lies, he dies. If he speaks truth, history will remember that the Empire listened when it mattered." As guards escorted Elias away, the crowd buzzed with uncertain energy. For the first time since the war had turned, a thread of possibility wound through the despair. High above, unseen by all but the Queen, the stars seemed to shimmer as if listening too. The War Council chamber glowed with layered star maps and shifting data streams. Elias stood at the center, surrounded by beings who could end his life with a thought. Yet he spoke with calm precision, explaining each step as if teaching a classroom back on Earth. "The coalition relies on synchronization," he said, pointing to converging fleet paths. "Their strength comes from arriving together, overwhelming targets with numbers. Disrupt that timing, and their advantage disappears." Zyra watched as her admirals tested the simulations, adjusting variables, running projections. Each time, the result was the same. Confusion spread through enemy ranks, losses mounted without direct confrontation. "It is elegant," one admiral admitted reluctantly. "But risky," another added. "If they detect the manipulation, they will retaliate with everything they have." "They already plan to," Elias said. "The difference is whether they do it together or alone." Hours passed as plans formed, contingencies layered upon contingencies. For the first time in cycles, the Council's voices carried something other than despair. When the first phase launched, subtle changes rippled through the network. Jump beacons recalibrated by fractions, communication delays introduced that mimicked natural interference. To the coalition, nothing seemed wrong until everything did. Fleets arrived too early or too late, strike groups missed their escorts, supply lines tangled into knots. Commanders accused one another of betrayal or incompetence. Panic spread faster than any signal. Queen Zyra stood once more on her balcony, watching enemy formations scatter across the hollow display. Against all expectation, the tide was turning. Elias was summoned to her side. "You may have saved my empire," she said, her voice low. "What do you ask in return?" Elias considered, then spoke softly. "Freedom for my people and a place at the table when this war ends. Not as subjects, but as partners." Zyra was silent for a long moment. Then she inclined her head, a gesture reserved for equals. "So it shall be," she said. "Let this war mark not just the survival of an empire, but the birth of something new." The coalition's unity shattered under the strain. Former allies withdrew to defend their own worlds, blaming one another for the failures. Aurelian fleets struck surgically, reclaiming key positions without the need for annihilation. Stories spread among the stars of a human who had changed the course of the war. Some called him a traitor to his species, others a savior. Among the Aurelians, he became a symbol of unexpected strength. Queen Zyra and Elias worked side by side, bridging gaps not just of strategy, but of culture. They argued, learned, and adapted. Each saw in the other a reflection of their own burdens. As the final battles concluded, the coalition sued for peace. Terms were harsh, but just, shaped by lessons learned at great cost. The war ended not with a final explosion, but with a signature. Queen Zyra addressed the galaxy once more, this time with Elias standing openly at her side. "Let this be remembered," she declared. "Not as the war that broke us, but as the moment we chose to listen." Humanity emerged from the shadows of defeat into a fragile but real alliance. No longer alone, no longer silent. And in the vast, watchful universe, a new story began, one where an alien queen and a human voice proved that survival sometimes depends not on power, but on the courage to stand and speak. Peace changed Aurelia in ways no victory ever had. Where once the city pulsed with military rhythm and rigid hierarchy, now it breathed with cautious curiosity. Former armories became research halls. Shipyards echoed with new designs meant not only for war, but for exploration and rebuilding. Elias Morgan walked the upper causeways of the capital, watching alien and human workers labor side by side. It still felt unreal to him, the way enemies had become colleagues, the way survival had rewritten history. He carried the weight of expectation now, not as a prisoner or strategist, but as a representative of an entire species. Human enclaves spread across Aurelian space, no longer camps but communities. Children born after the war learned 2 languages before they learned fear. They grew up hearing stories not just of Earth's fall, but of its endurance. Queen Zyra observed these changes from her high chambers, her perception sharper than ever. Victory had saved her throne, but it had also transformed her rule. No longer could she command by tradition alone. Now she ruled by consent, earned through survival and shared risk. The council had changed as well. Where once it was a circle of pure Aurelian bloodlines, now other species held seats, including humanity. Some elders resisted, their loyalty chained to the past, but most understood a simple truth: isolation had nearly destroyed them. Yet peace carried its own dangers. Beyond the borders of the former coalition, other powers watched closely. They whispered of the war's end, of a human who had bent an empire's fate with thought alone. And fear, once broken, began to reform in new shapes. Zyra summoned Elia's one cycle after the treaty's signing. "The stars are restless," she told him, gesturing toward deep space projections. "The galaxy has learned something from this war, not unity, but caution." Elias nodded. "They will adapt," he said, "just like we did. The question is whether we meet that future divided or together." They spoke long into the artificial night, of alliances, of shared defense, of exploration beyond known lanes. For the first time, humanity was not reacting to the galaxy, it was helping shape it. Far away, on the shattered remains of Earth, reconstruction had begun. Green shoots pushed through scorched soil, guided by Aurelian bioengineering and human stubbornness. Cities rose slowly, not as monuments to dominance, but as reminders of resilience. Elias returned there once, standing on a hill where his home had once been. He felt grief, yes, but also pride. Humanity had not vanished into history, it had evolved within it. Back on Aurelia, Queen Zyra addressed her people again. She spoke not of enemies or borders, but of legacy. "An empire that survives by conquest alone is already dying," she declared. "An empire that learns can endure." The words carried across systems, recorded and shared. They inspired hope in some, suspicion in others, but they could not be ignored. Years passed, and the legend of the human who stood in the crowd grew. Some versions claimed he had foreseen the war's end long before it came. Others said the queen herself had been waiting for such a voice. The truth lay somewhere quieter, in a moment of courage amid despair. Elias aged among beings who did not. His hair grayed, his steps slowed, but his influence deepened. He trained others, human and alien alike, teaching them how to think across systems, how to see consequences beyond borders. When his final day came, it was peaceful. Queen Zyra stood beside him, her long life granting her the strange pain of watching friends fade. "The galaxy will remember you," she said. Elias smiled faintly. "Then make sure it remembers why," he replied. After his passing, a new tradition emerged. At every major assembly, a space was left open among the crowd. A reminder that the next turning point might not come from a throne or a fleet, but from someone willing to stand. And so the war became history, the legend became lesson. Across the stars, civilizations learned that survival was not always forged in fire. Sometimes it was born in a single voice, rising from the crowd, changing everything.